Hi Paleo people. So this is going to be a video on how to measure Ammonite sutures using GIMP. GIMP is a Photoshop type app, except that it's free. You can get it for Mac or Windows. So that's what I use. You can use anything you want, but I like GIMP because we have these rulers. This ruler is set up every 250 units of length, but if you zoom in, you can see hundreds. So that's what I did here. I marked off 100. So our external lobe is going to be on the 100 line. If we could put the 0 here, it would be easier, but we can't move the ruler. So we're going to start at 100. And then we're going to find U1. So that's probably U4 or 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So U1 is all the way over here. That's U1 actually. Okay, so we're going to end it right here. So U1 is all the way here, but if you notice, that is an uneven number here. We want it to be even hundreds. So we're going to move it up to 1600. Now, in order to make sure that we are reaching all the way to 1600, we're just going to hit Control S. That's the scale button. And that will, or sorry, Shift S on a PC. So you'll hit the Shift S, do the little scale button, and then you can just scale it so that your external lobe meets, or the U1 rather, meets the other grid line, the blue dash line that we put here. So we're talking about what U1 is. This thing here that I'm circling with my cursor, that is U1. Okay, so now that we've done that, so we want to make sure that our other side is also still on the line. So the external lobe, we don't want it to move from the blue dashed line on this side. Okay. So I know it's a little bit zoomed in here. So if we look, we go from 100 to 1600. And that's our hemi-suture length going from E to U1 is 1600 little tick marks up here. So we are gonna take 1/10 of that length. So 1/10 of this length, it's really going to be 160 little tick marks representing 1600 units of length, probably pixels. We're going to look at this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Remember, we started at 100, so we're subtracting 100. So we need to count here. We're going to make another line. So we reach into our ruler on the y-axis and we're going to make another grid line. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So that should be 1/10 our hemi-suture length. That looks about right. So now we have our hemi-suture length, or our ruler length R. We're going to make a new layer, which on a PC, I have a PC, it's going to be Control-Shift-N. And then you just hit OK. You could also come up here and hit layer, go to new layer, but again, it's Control-Shift-N. So now we have our new layer over here, and we're just going to make a little tiny box. And we're making sure we're in the new layer. So then pick a color that you find noticeable, because when you rotate this, it's going to get a little bit blurry. I like to work in magenta. It's the most noticeable color for me. For some reason, I associate magenta with the 1/10 ruler length for Ammonite sutures. So I chose magenta, but choose whatever color you want. And now we're going to cut that. So Control X and Control V, we're going to paste it onto a new layer. So the reason we paste it onto a new layer is because the entire size of that new layer is going to be the size of our little ruler here. If we left it in the original layer, we would have the entire transparent area around it as part of the layer as well. We don't want that. Okay, so the middle of the external lobe is where the arrow is, and we just want to essentially connect the dots. So every time we have our ruler, we're going to lay the ruler down at the beginning point where my cursor is, and we are going to rotate that ruler around to wherever it touches, wherever it can fit to touch the suture line again. So we do Shift R on a PC. We're going to rotate down. And now we're gonna do the same thing again, just paste yourself another ruler, and we're gonna look for where it stops from the previous ruler, and we're gonna make a new one. So we can't go down. If we go down, there's nowhere for the other end of the ruler to meet, so we have to go up. You have to find wherever the ruler is gonna meet the line next. And then another thing, I never mentioned this to anybody, but a rule of thumb that I like to follow with overlapping these corners here. So let me just zoom in. So the corners here are overlapped. My general rule of thumb here is if the corners are going to be 90 degrees or less, I will overlap the corners. If they're going to be above 90 degrees, what I'll do, I'll show you here what I do. Oops. If they're going to be more than 90 degrees angles, I will just make sure that they line up. And it doesn't have to be exact. Again, these are ballparks, but that's my personal threshold. If it's more than 90 degrees, I will just line them up flush to each other. But if it is less than 90 degrees, I will just overlap the two ends of the rulers. And again, it can take a little while to get comfortable with this. I did thousands of these when I was in my previous master's program, and it was a lot of work, but you may not move it may not seem like I'm moving that fast. I kind of am. I used to move a lot slower, and I think even if you are moving faster than me right out the gate, which is entirely possible, um, you're gonna get faster as you go. It's just something that takes repetition. And if it's weird that I just rotated that ruler before looking at the area it was going, that's just because I'm overly familiar with Ammonite sutures. So eventually, if you do enough of these, you'll find yourself doing the same thing. Um, if you get really into sutures, you'll get to a point where you can just tell what Ammonite the suture came from. So in this case, we don't really have an area where the suture is going to not be hanging over the edge of this part of the lobe. So in this case, I'm just going to skip the area altogether. And I think you'll find that the positive and negative spaces of areas that you skip altogether are going to balance each other out. So you'll have roughly the same amount of space that you skipped in one direction as you do in the other direction. So this up here, oops, so here where my cursor is, we skipped an area that's below the suture line, or sorry, but below the ruler line. And then here we skipped an area that is above the ruler line. These areas are roughly the same size. So it just naturally evens out. I don't know why, but it does. It's something I've noticed many, many times. So this one's a little iffy. So if this one is kind of, it looks like it should fit here, but I'm not sure. So what I would do in this case is go back and make sure you put this one in the right spot. And I think I did. Um, yeah, I think that's okay. See, it's a ballpark. Sometimes there's some judgment calls involved here, but none of the judgment calls are usually like a huge deal. None of the judgment calls you'll have to make are ever going to be more than like one ruler from your whole count, which is not usually statistically significant. So again, we have an area where we can't reach that little satellite here. Again, satellites are the little tiny upward folds. Lobelets are the little tiny downward folds. We're talking about folds within folds with saddles and lobelets. So I'm going to put it here. And I know that this one came out slightly different from my demo yesterday, even though it is the same suture that we looked at in seminar on Friday night. It can have a slight amount of variation. If you do the same suture twice, you're very unlikely to get exactly the same measurement, which is kind of the case for most of paleontology. If you measure the same bone twice, you measure the bone, you come back an hour later, you measure it again, it's probably going to be a little bit different. It won't be a statistically significant difference, but human error is always going to be a factor, especially in a field like paleontology when all we're doing is measuring things by hand. So, always do the best you can, but it's okay if, there a little bit of human error is to be expected. So don't make yourself nuts with this. Sorry about the dog. Okay, so then this is something, Eric, I know you emailed me about this before. So if you get to the very, very last part of it, oh, we're not even at the last part of it, so I guess I'll explain this when we get there. Jumping the gun as usual. Okay. So it looks like it's going to need to be explained anyway. When you get to the very, very last part of your suture and you have one more step to go, if that step does not fit, as this one does not fit, we're not going to have a whole step here. What we do, we just don't do anything. You just leave it. If you can't fit a complete step, you don't ever put a step. So for this suture, now we go back and we count our steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. That is a little different from yesterday. I'm not sure what I did differently. It would be a good idea to go back and check what you did differently if they come out very different, more than a couple of steps away from each other. So I'm not going to do that right now. The point is that's how you trace. And then if you did your fractal dimension equation, the fractal dimension equals the log of 23 over the log of 110, or since we're already in the denominator, we'll just say the log of 10 to avoid getting a negative number. Since we are working with logs of 10, you don't even need to put a denominator because the log of 10 is 1. So you could just do log 23 in your calculator and that would give you the number. Let me just do log 23 real quick on my phone. So log 23 is 1.6362 roughly. So it's 1.3617, but I always round to 3 decimal places for some reason. If you prefer to round to 2 or 4 decimal points, we can do that in your paper. I prefer 3. I'm weird about the number 3. So that's how you do it. It's pretty straightforward, I think. If you have any questions, just let me know. I like to start from E to U. Some people start from U to E. If you start from U to E, the number of steps is going to be a little bit different. So I would recommend just keeping the same direction all the time. Okay, I'm going to go post this now.